For 50 years, BMW owned 4 words no competitor could touch: the ultimate driving machine. It wasn't a slogan a marketing department dreamed up on a Tuesday. It was a promise you felt in your hands, in the way a steering wheel talked back to you on a wet road, and a generation of drivers built part of their identity around that promise, because BMW spent 5 decades earning it. Then, somewhere in a boardroom in Munich that nobody outside the company was watching, the people running BMW made a series of decisions that had almost nothing to do with driving at all. They charged for warmth. They redesigned the one part of the car every buyer sees before they ever start the engine, on purpose, knowing most people would hate it. They poured 18 billion euros into a software bet that landed them in 10th place anyway. None of this is a story about Tesla or BYD stealing BMW's crown. This is a story about what happens inside a 100-year-old company when the people at the top become more afraid of looking outdated than they are of losing the customers who made them who they are. By the time you get to the end of this, you'll understand exactly how a boardroom talked itself into alienating its most loyal buyers on purpose, in public, and kept doing it even after the backlash proved them wrong. But it starts somewhere much smaller than a boardroom. It starts with the sound of an engine. In 1972, BMW spun off a tiny racing division out of Munich called BMW Motorsport GmbH. 35 engineers, one obsession: build a car that talks back to the person driving it. A year later, their 3.0 CSL, nicknamed the Batmobile for the wing bolted to its trunk, started winning the European Touring Car Championship. It kept winning for 6 straight years. That obsession didn't stay on a racetrack. It bled straight into the cars regular people could buy. By 1974, an ad agency, Amorati and Puris, put 4 words on it: the ultimate driving machine. It wasn't hype. BMW sold just over 15,000 cars in America that year. Within a decade, that number was pushing 100,000, because the slogan kept telling the truth, and eventually people stopped questioning it. Here's what that promise actually meant under the metal. Every M car had a near-perfect 50-50 weight balance between the front and rear axles, so the car turned exactly the way your body expected it to. Hydraulic steering pushed the texture of the road straight into your palms. No filter, no interpretation, just the tarmac talking to your hands. Naturally aspirated inline-6 engines revved with a sound you could pick out with your eyes closed in a parking lot from 2 rows away. That wasn't marketing copy. That was a company deciding at the level of engineering that the person behind the wheel came first. If you ever owned one of those cars, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Drop your model in the comments and tell me the engine note you still miss. Then everything changed. Quietly. In a boardroom, nobody was watching. By the early 2020s, the people running BMW looked at Silicon Valley and got nervous. Tesla wasn't building cars the way BMW built cars. Tesla was building computers that happened to have wheels, updating them overnight while owners slept. And Wall Street rewarded that story with a valuation that made a century of German engineering look almost quaint. What do you do when the market stops rewarding the thing you're actually good at? What do you do when the feeling of a perfectly weighted steering rack doesn't show up on a quarterly earnings call? BMW's answer was to spend its way onto the new battlefield. Research and development budget, 18 billion euros in a single year, the largest investment project in the company's history, built around a system called Superbrain, meant to answer Tesla's software directly. This is where a very ordinary piece of human psychology took over. Once you've committed 18 billion euros to a bet, walking away from it doesn't feel like a business decision anymore. It feels like admitting you were wrong in public with your name on it. So instead of adjusting course, executives tend to double down, spending more to justify what they already spent, right up until the data makes it impossible to ignore. Economists call it the sunk cost fallacy. BMW's boardroom lived it in real time, and the data did arrive. An independent industry study ranking automakers on software readiness put BMW in 10th place. Tesla, Rivian, NIO, and Lucid all finished ahead of a company that had spent 100 years building some of the most mechanically expressive cars on the road. You'd think 10th place would be a wake-up call. Instead, it triggered something else entirely, a decision so strange that when BMW's own head of design was asked to explain it, his answer sounded less like strategy and more like a confession. Walk up to a new BMW 4 Series or an XM today, and the first thing you notice is the grille. Not because it's elegant, because it's enormous, an illuminated, oversized centerpiece that swallows the entire front end of the car. On the old E33 series, the kidney grille was a whisper, 2 modest slots that let the engine breathe. This version shouts, BMW's head of design, Domagoj Duquesne, was asked directly why the company kept pushing a look that so much of its own customer base openly hated. His answer, on the record, internal research showed only about 1 in 5 people actually liked the new grille on cars like the 4 Series, and that smaller group, not the loyal majority, was exactly who BMW was building for. Sit with that for a second. A company was told by its own research that most of its audience disliked what it was about to sell them, and built it anyway. This is confirmation bias wearing a suit. Once a decision gets attached to a strategy that's already cost billions, the people defending it stop looking for reasons they're wrong and start collecting reasons they're right. The small group that liked the grille became proof that the bet was working. Everyone who hated it became noise to be managed, not a warning to be heeded. It's the same instinct that kept the €18 billion software bet alive after a 10th place ranking, just dressed up in a different department. BMW's senior VP of design, Adrian van Hooydonk, later admitted the social media reaction was brutal. Car forums that had spent decades defending BMW against every rival turned their fire inward. Long-time owners started cross-shopping Genesis and Lexus, brands they'd have laughed at a decade earlier. The grille was never really the story. It was the symptom. The disease was somewhere else entirely underneath the floor, where the weight had already started piling on. Every M car BMW ever built chased that same 50-50 balance, because it's what let a driver feel exactly what the car was doing underneath them. That obsession is now fighting a war against physics. It cannot win. Take the i7, BMW's flagship electric sedan. It weighs roughly 820 pounds more than the gasoline-powered 760i it replaced. Nearly 3 tons of battery, motor and steel. BMW's own engineers admit the trade-off openly. Christian Thalmeier, who manages driving dynamics development at BMW, has said that heavy EV batteries and electric motors create real problems keeping cars feeling light and agile, and that the 10-millisecond response time built for combustion engines can't keep up with the near-instant reactions of an electric motor. So how do you make a 3-ton car feel like it weighs half that? You don't. You fake it. Enter the heart of Joy, a central controller built to simulate agility through software, firing brakes and vectoring torque in rapid bursts to recreate a feeling a lighter, better balanced car would have delivered on its own. Reviewers who've driven both cars back-to-back describe the gasoline 760i as more natural through a corner, gathering its weight instinctively, while the electric A7 handles well but never quite lets you forget how heavy it actually is. That's the trade sitting at the centre of the modern BMW. The company that once let you feel the road through your palms now spends enormous engineering effort convincing you that you still can, using code instead of chassis. And if you think that substitution only shows up when you turn the wheel, wait until you see what happened the first time an owner tried to turn on their seat heater. In July 2022, BMW rolled out a new feature under a program called Functions on Demand. Heated seats physically installed in the vast majority of the cars it sold would now require a monthly subscription to activate. $18 a month, or roughly $180 a year, just to turn on hardware already sitting under the customer's own backside. This wasn't buried on some stripped-down trim level either. Around 90% of BMW's customers already ordered the heated seat package as standard, which meant BMW had started charging its most loyal, higher-spending buyers a recurring fee for something they had already paid for once, in every practical sense. The backlash was immediate, and it crossed borders. Customers in the UK, Germany and South Korea, where the program first launched, flooded social media with the same accusation. They were being charged twice for one part of the car they already owned. By September 2023, 14 months after it started, BMW quietly killed the heated seat subscription. Peter Noter, the board member overseeing sales and marketing, admitted that customer response was the reason. It didn't end there. Years later, BMW's own head of product communications went on record and said the criticism the company received over seat heating meant it probably wasn't the best way to introduce subscriptions in the first place. That's not a competitor's spin. That's BMW's own communications leadership admitting, after the fact, that they'd misjudged exactly how far they could push the people who trusted them most. Heated seats were never really about heated seats. They were a test, a way to find out how much of your loyalty a 100-year-old brand could quietly convert into recurring revenue. For one humiliating year, BMW got its answer, and it should have changed everything that came after it. It didn't. Every echo chamber starts with one piece of data that seems to prove the critics wrong. For BMW, that piece of data arrived early. When the redesigned grille first launched on the 4 Series, sales dipped only slightly, down about 2% in an already rough year for the whole industry. Design boss Domagoj Dukic pointed to numbers like that as proof the backlash was just noise, telling reporters that after 20 years in the business, everybody has an opinion, and that's normal. That's exactly how an echo chamber protects itself. A small, tolerable dip gets treated as permission to ignore a much bigger problem building underneath it. It's the same trap that swallows plenty of established companies staring down disruptive competition, the instinct to keep optimizing the thing you already know how to build, while dismissing every early signal that the ground has shifted, because acting on those signals would mean admitting the last several years of strategy were wrong. The real numbers eventually arrived, just not where Munich was watching closely enough. In China, BMW's single largest market, deliveries for BMW and Mini combined peaked in 2021 at nearly 850,000 vehicles. By 2025, that number had fallen to around 626,000. In the first half of 2026 alone, sales in China dropped another 20%. Domestic competitors offering comparable technology and comparable luxury at a fraction of the price simply out-executed BMW on the exact battlefield BMW had chosen for itself. An echo chamber doesn't fail loudly. It fails quietly, one dismissed warning at a time, until the day the warnings turn into a quarterly earnings call nobody can spin. By then, the fix isn't a redesign or a memo. It's a much harder conversation about who was actually in the room when the decision got made. Sit inside a new BMW today, and the first thing that greets you isn't an engine note, it's a screen. The latest interface, iDrive X, wraps a 17.9-inch display into a pillar-to-pillar panoramic strip across the dashboard, paired with a 3-dimensional head-up display. The physical rotary controller that anchored every iDrive system for over 20 years is gone. Touch and voice only. BMW didn't make this change because drivers were begging for it. A Swedish car magazine, V Bilagar, ran a controlled test timing how long it took drivers to complete simple tasks, such as changing the radio and adjusting the climate control. A 2005 Volvo with old-fashioned physical buttons took less time, with the driver's eyes off the road, than a Tesla Model 3, a BMW iX, or a Volkswagen ID3, all newer cars built around touchscreens. The technology BMW is racing to add is measurably less safe than the buttons it replaced. So why keep building it? Because the buyer, BMW, is now chasing it. One industry study found that a majority of luxury car buyers in China, BMW's largest single market, said they'd switch brands entirely for better connectivity features. Screens sell. Ambient lighting with dozens of customizable colours sells. A perfectly weighted steering rack doesn't show up in a showroom demo the way a glowing dashboard does. This isn't luxury the way BMW once defined it. It's the illusion of luxury, built for a customer who experiences the car through a touchscreen before they ever experience it through a corner. So, who is BMW actually building cars for in 2026? Follow the money. China alone accounted for roughly a quarter of BMW's entire global sales in 2025, more than the US and Germany combined. For over a decade, that single market has quietly become the real audience BMW designs around. Not the enthusiast in Bavaria who grew up dreaming about an E46 M3. That new customer doesn't necessarily care about 50-50 weight distribution or naturally aspirated engines. BMW builds extended wheelbase sedans for buyers who are chauffeured more often than they drive themselves, fitted with the largest possible center screen and the deepest possible software ecosystem. BMW has gone as far as building future Chinese market models around Huawei's Harmony OS and a language model developed with DeepSeek, letting Chinese technology partners define the digital experience inside a German performance car. Here's the uncomfortable part. Even that pivot isn't working the way BMW hoped. Domestic Chinese brands like BYD, Xiaomi and NIO now build EVs with comparable screens, comparable software and comparable luxury touches at a fraction of BMW's price, without a century of manufacturing overhead sitting on top of it. Sales in China fell another 20% in the first half of 2026 alone, which means the very customer BMW redesigned itself around is the one walking away fastest. BMW didn't just alienate the old driver, it built an entirely new identity to replace him, and that new identity is now losing to companies that never cared about being the ultimate driving machine in the first place. Here's the strange part. By almost every engineering metric, the modern BMW lineup is the most capable in the company's history. It accelerates faster than any classic M car ever built. It carries more computing power than the engineers who built the first 3.0 CSL back in 1972 could have imagined. It offers range, refinement and safety systems the old analog era never touched. And yet something is unmistakably missing. You can measure horsepower and battery capacity. You cannot measure the feeling of a hydraulic steering rack telling your hands exactly what the front tyres are doing. You cannot put a number on the trust a driver builds with a car over a decade of ownership. The kind of trust BMW spent 50 years earning with 4 words and then spent less than 1 quietly spending down. Remember the executive who admitted BMW was designing for the small group who liked the grille, not the majority who didn't. Remember the $18 seat heater that took a global backlash to kill. Remember the 18 billion euros chasing a software ranking that landed BMW in 10th place anyway. None of that came from a rival automaker circling BMW's territory. It came from BMW's own boardroom, choosing the theoretical customer of tomorrow over the loyal customer of today, again and again, even after the data proved them wrong every single time. That pattern hasn't been corrected. It's just moved on to its next test case, whatever that turns out to be. BMW built the most technically perfect machine in its history, and somewhere between the panic over Tesla and the quiet decision to charge for warmth, the company forgot the one thing that made all of that engineering worth caring about. It wasn't the car, it was always the person driving it. If you think BMW can still find its way back to that promise, or if you think the ultimate driving machine is already gone for good, say so in the comments. And if you want the next teardown before anyone else sees it, hit subscribe. It helps more than you'd think.